attractive male or a female. So this is also under the psychological control of the autonomic nervous system. Why is that? I will tell you why is that. Because as the pupil dilates, more light comes in. And if a stimulus that you're perceiving with your eyes is, let's say, psychologically appetizing, whether this is food or something else, then the pupil is going to dilate so that you can perceive as much information as you can about it. And this is also what happens when you're under stress, or when you're, let's say, in the occasion in the past when you were being hunted by a voracious predator. So you would allow your pupil to dilate so that more information, more light comes in, so that you perceive your surrounding and your environment in a much better way. Now, this type of reflex is controlled by the sympathetic nervous system. So under sympathetic influence, the pupillary dilator muscle, the radial muscle, starts constricting. And the radial muscle, as it constricts, it basically pulls the iris apart. So it exposes more of the pupil. In the contrary fashion, when I have, in contrast to alpha-1 receptor stimulation, when I have acetylcholine release, then I have the constrictor muscles taking place. So I have muscarinic release, then we have the constriction of the sphincter muscles, and eventually the shrinkage of the pupil. Let's see some clinical applications. In the occasion that an individual suffers from a stroke, particularly on the right or the left side of the cortex, then it is likely that this individual is also going to lose the inability of sympathetic innervations, depending on the side of the stroke. Now, if the lesion is on the right side, then the symptoms are going to appear on the right side. In the occasion of Horner syndrome, we have the ptosis, meiosis, and anhidrosis of this individual. So in the occasion of the Horner syndrome, we're going to have the ptosis of the eyelid, which is controlled by sympathetic nerves under innervation of alpha receptors. We're going to have the constriction of the pupil because sympathetic nerves no longer innervate this type of radial muscle of the eye. And we also have the anhidrosis, which is part of the sympathetic nervous system, but is controlled by what type of transmitter? Acetylcholine, excellent. Now, in this occasion over here, the physician orders a test of this type of symptomatology with cocaine drops. Now, cocaine, what it does in the eye, it basically stops the reuptake of the norepinephrine by the postsynaptic neurons. And by doing so, it allows more norepinephrine to be circulated across the muscle, eventually constantly stimulating the muscle, keeping the dilator muscle, the radial muscle, constricted, eventually exposing the pupil, making the pupil appear much larger. So over here, when the cocaine drops were applied on the left unaffected side of the stroke, we have pupillary dilation because the reuptake of norepinephrine has been blocked by cocaine drops. In the occasion, however, in Horner syndrome, this is not going to happen because there is not enough norepinephrine being circulated in the muscle due to the loss of the sympathetic innervation. Now, we came across the muscarinic receptors, and since most of the things that we come across in nature, they're also in cellular body, there are certain classes of poisonous mushrooms, and these are very potent muscarinic stimulants. So ingestion of this type of mushrooms would lead to muscarinic poisoning. So we are talking about an excessive amount of muscarine being circulated in the bloodstream, which is going to lead to symptoms such as excessive salivation, defecation, loss of the contractile tone of the bladder, sweating, lactation in pregnant women, and so on. In order to treat this type of symptoms, you need to provide the individual with muscarinic antagonists. Now, enough about mushroom poisoning. I don't know how many of you are big mushrooms, but in anyhow, let's look into motion sickness. Please pay attention. Last slide, okay? Last slide. Okay, motion sickness. When it comes to motion sickness, some of the symptoms are vomiting and dizziness, right? Now, by providing muscarinic antagonists, what you do is you increase the tone of the sympathetic nervous system. And what the sympathetic nervous system does to the gut is basically constricts the gut, so you avoid vomiting, and also it disrupts the communication between the vestibular apparatus of the ear with the stomach, which is basically what is causing vertigo or dizziness. Okay? So by giving muscarinic antagonists, then you control for symptoms of dizziness. Nevertheless, under the influence of scopolamine, which was given in this lady because she had symptoms of vertigo or dizziness or motion sickness, she had dry mouth, she had loss of voiding, she had difficulty in voiding urine, she had a heart rate increase because of the loss of the parasympathetic tone, and she also had dilation of the pupils. So as you can see from this instance, we have the stopping of the muscarinic influence, and we have an elevation in the sympathetic influence as a side effect. Does this make sense so far? Okay. So this brings us to the end of our today's lecture. You have also notes which I would advise you to read. If you have any question, now it's the time for you to ask them. Yes?
Mushrooms stimulate the muscarinic receptors. Muscarinic receptors are for acetylcholine in the parasympathetic nervous system. So why are the symptoms excessive salivation and sweating? Because I understand that sweating and salivation are part of the sympathetic nervous system.
Okay, so there is a very nice question here, okay? So your colleague over here is asking why under muscarinic mushroom poisoning you have excessive sweating. Because although the sweat glands are under the control of the sympathetic nervous system, they're still being activated by cholinergic influence. And this is what these muscarinic mushrooms do. They basically elevate acetylcholine. So excuse me, is this something that does not concern you? Please do not talk. It's already very difficult for us giving you a lecture here. We're here for you. So since acetylcholine release is gonna be excessive in the body, then I would have a widespread activation of muscarinic receptors.
So even if the parts of the sympathetic nervous system which have muscarinic receptors, it will be activated?
Absolutely. Very good question. Any other question? Yes?
Doctor, you said that when the pupils expand,
Mm-hmm.
the pupils dilate, it's usually in moments like, for example, running away from a predator.
Yeah.
And you need to allow more information to the pupils.
Yes.
But sometimes in cases of intoxication,
Yes.
the pupils also dilate.
Yes.
But that doesn't make people more aware. Why?
Yes. Now, that's also a very good question. Now, in cases of intoxication, and I think you're referring about drugs, yes? Kind of the occasion of cocaine
Or marijuana.
or marijuana. Okay. Now, the pupils dilate in such an occasion for the reason being that it's an activation. Okay, cannabinoid receptors in the occasion of marijuana, they're also present in the skeletal muscles. And also the eye is a form of skeletal muscle. But let's focus more on cocaine, which is much more evident, because cocaine is basically going to lead to an excessive activation of the sympathetic nervous system. Now, the reason why people are more aware, because these all intoxicating substances, they affect the cortex. They don't only exert an effect on the peripheral nervous system. Because the cortex is being inhibited, and especially in occasions such as very potent drugs, such as cocaine, we're talking about the phenomenon of hypofrontality. Now, the frontal cortex is what guides your behavior, is what guides the initiation of action, the understanding, memory retention. Now, if you're not being guided by your frontal cortex to understand the stimuli that you have around you, basically you're numbing your frontal cortex, which is basically gonna be the organ that is gonna integrate the information that you're receiving. Now, in the occasion of marijuana, this is the case. In the occasion, however, of cocaine, we're talking about, again, hyperfrontality in initial exposure to it. So we're talking about more potent cognitive abilities. But in certain other drugs, such as marijuana, we're talking about the jeopardization of the frontal cortex, which is a completely different mechanism. We can talk about this more in the second year. Okay? Thank you very much. No more questions?